Welcome back to StartupHakk. I'm Spencer Thomason, and today we're digging in to take a closer look at a topic that every C# developer should be paying attention to: finding elements in a list using find versus first or default. I recently came across some test data that left me surprised. Even though I've used both methods countless times, I always thought that they were practically the same, but the results show that they might not be exactly the case. So in this video, we'll run through real tests with real code and show how they compare in today's .NET environment, especially with .NET 9 on the horizon. So let's dive in and find out which one gives the best performance today. All right, so I'm Spencer Thomason, and here at StartupHakk, we love to train software developers in our licensed boot camps and build custom software solutions for companies. I do a lot of work as a fractional CTO. With over a decade of executive leadership and a solid 25 years in software development, I've mastered the art of transforming technology, teams, and products. So now, as always, make sure you go and pull down the latest code samples, because we provide those code samples for every single one of our programming videos. Now, today we're going to be digging into find versus first or default. Now, I know on modern hardware, a lot of people are like, just turn up the CPUs or something like, but it's good for us as a .NET developer to be able to make sure that we're paying attention to optimization. So as always, make sure that you pull down the code from the code samples here. We have a GitHub repo that does give hundreds of different code samples, and you can see I'm just working right from these code samples with instructions and everything for you. So make sure you're pulling these down, because we offer free code every single time. So let's dive into what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. So how to optimize finding elements in a list. So if you look at this example here, right, in the first one, we do first or default, right? Whereas in the second one, we use find. Now they're both going to work, and they're both going to produce the same end result, but which one's going to do it faster? That's the big question here, right? And so you can see from these numbers that I originally saw, it looked like first or default was lagging quite a bit behind the mean on find. Now let's go and look at these and see a little bit more about, dive in just a little bit. So what steps you need to take? First of all, you need to install benchmark.net NuGet package. Next, you want to create a list.testcs that contains the function. Then we're going to configure the benchmark.net in program.cs, and then we're going to run the program in release mode. So normally we run this stuff in debug mode. Today we're going to run in release mode. So that's a huge piece. So let me get that all set up here for you. Okay, so I've pulled down the code sample here, right? Make sure you pull this down. This is a pretty simple code sample here. We do have a controller and things because we are running some of this, but and then we also have our list test code here, right? And this is pretty straightforward, pretty simple, but we've got some lists. Let me collapse all of these, but we can basically say we're got a test that says find an int, one that test find of the integer, another one that tests the first integer, another one that tests the find object, another one tests for test first object, right? And then we've got our models here for using this, right? So this is just the class that we're using, and these are pretty straightforward because each of these is going to build the list, and then like this case, it's going to use find. And in this case, it's going to use first or default. Then this one is doing it for the same thing for an object, where it's going to use the find, and it's going to find the object, and then it's going to use the test first or default on an object, okay? So pretty straightforward what that's doing here. And then what this is going to do is this is a very simple minimal web API. We add a controller. We do need to create this. So in the code that you pull down, it's not going to have the path. You're going to have to put the path somewhere that it can drop some artifacts, and it just a place that you have permissions to and that it can run the artifacts. It's then going to run this list test, right? Because this list test is what's going to run here. And this will run this list test, and it's going to run that with the benchmark runner, right? And passing in these configs that we've given it here, right? And so the code instance, and as well as that. It's going to do Swagger, do some of this. It's going to check if it's development, it'll pop open Swagger or not. But this actually won't run the benchmark tester because debugging is so all over the place. You can't really know. It doesn't give you really good results with that. So it has to be run in release mode. So you need to change from debug to release mode. The other thing that I ran into is, I would run this with just HTTP. And then when you're running, don't hit this button like you normally do. You want to do this one that starts without debugging, right? So with all of that in place here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and kick this off and run. And it's going to take a minute to run through these, but it's going to run through each of those samples, and then we'll see the results. So I'm going to pull this up here and drag it over while it's running here. And so it's going to start running this. You can see a lot of the, and so what it's doing is it's running a large sample size. So we want to run enough in a large sample size to be able to compare, right? So we want to see the operation, because how it runs on your computer and how it runs on my computer are going to be different. So I'm going to let this run through. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. It just takes maybe about a minute for this to run, but I'm going to pause the video because it's kind of like watching paint dry to run this. But I'll show you in the end, and the end results will be very interesting. Okay, so once it's finished here, then you'll see the results of the test that we found here. So in our result, and it ran quite a few of these, right? Like it actually allocated a pretty decent amount of bytes. And so interesting to see, because it's testing a lot of different pieces here, right? So it's checking that for find the integer, our mean was 9.3 seconds. So about a 10% difference here versus FirstOrDefault, right? Now the error rate was just a little bit, your standard deviation's a little bit off, but the memory that it allocated was almost identical, right? Took right next to the exact same amount of memory. But if anything, FirstOrDefault actually did use slightly more. Again, not even negligible. Now, the next thing for finding objects, find worked also a bit faster, but as you see the difference starts to spread on objects, FirstOrDefault wasn't that far behind, right? And your margin of error is just enough that really kind of erases some of this a little bit. And so, whereas we were seeing a 10% on your static objects in your primitive data types, on your objects, you were seeing a not quite as big of a spread here, right? So really, this is kind of a negligible difference, almost identical again on the amount of RAM. So amount of memory allocated. So you can see that really in the end, the verdict here on this is that, especially for objects, it's going to be such a negligible difference that it's not going to ultimately make a huge difference to your code in the end. And so this is so ultimately, kind of if you were saying this is a myth versus myth busted, I'd say it's plausible that it's faster, but ultimately at the end of the day, I wouldn't say that this is earth-shattering enough to make a huge difference. So if I was in a code review and I heard a senior correcting a junior saying, hey, this is a lot faster, the term a lot would be a little bit loaded, I think, in that, because I don't know that it is much faster. Again, on static objects, on primitive data types, it might be slightly faster, but I would call it slightly, not a lot. So ultimately, from the results, it's clear that find does perform just slightly better than FirstOrDefault, but therefore the conclusion is possible that if you use find in your code and you already are using FirstOrDefault, don't go change it. In the future, you might use find, but they really produce the same thing even if find is slightly faster. Now, here at StartupHakk, we love training software developers in our licensed coding bootcamp and building custom software solutions for companies. So reach out if you need some help with your company. You can hit us up at startuphakk.com/Spencer or hit me up at spencer@startuphakk.com. And otherwise, we will catch you guys next time. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because we bring you lots of great tutorials and tips that every developer should know. See you next time.